Well, you were so wholly entertaining. I'm not a storyteller at all. I am a Christian Science Practitioner. Is it okay to sit down? Do you have to stand?
No, go ahead. Do whatever you want.
Okay. All right. Great. Good. Thanks. I'll sit. I am a Christian Science Practitioner, but I certainly haven't always been a Christian Science Practitioner. I loved the invitation to come and to tell a story about searching, because I think a spiritual search is something that we're frequently about. Learning more about God, discovering something new about God, something that's meaningful to you, something that really rings true, something that seems logical and really makes sense to your life, something that really can help you be a better person, make better decisions, think more clearly, help others more. All of these to me come under that spiritual search, that spiritual umbrella, if you will. At any rate, I love the story. When Betty asked me, I thought of the story of this second grader who was in the back of the room coloring furiously. And her teacher noticed it and walked up behind her, put her hands on her hips, and looked down and said, "What are you drawing?" And she looked up and she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But nobody knows what God looks like." The second grader didn't miss a beat. She looked up and she said, "They will in a minute." And I love that, because I think that we're all surely searching for a higher power, for something that really has meaning in our lives. I was raised in a Christian church, and I loved it. I loved the choir. I loved the minister. I loved his message. He wore a black robe, and every time he passed me, I just felt like God was walking right in front of me. I just so admired him and what he was bringing to the church and what he meant to everyone who attended the church. I loved the church picnics. I loved the social activities. It wasn't until I met my best friend when I was 15 years old, who was a Christian Scientist. And it turned out that I fell in love with him and wanted to marry him. And my mom said, "He's a Christian Scientist. Those Christian Scientists are nuts." She was just appalled at the thought that I might spend the rest of my life married to a Christian Scientist, because they don't believe in doctors. And she just couldn't get her arms around that. And so we made a deal. We decided to get married. We got married in college, actually. But we decided that our children would never attend a Christian Science Sunday school, and that we would never even talk about Christian Science in our home. Well, a few years later, after we married, I found myself alone because he was in Vietnam and I was pregnant. And I was feeling pretty desperate and pretty lonely, and I was searching. As it happened, the closest church to the apartment I lived in was a Christian Science church. And so I went to that church. And I brought my Bible. I won't turn to it, but when I walked in the first night, they were reading, and I discovered later, it was Psalms 103. And it talked about this God that would forgive all your iniquities, heal all your diseases, and shower you with blessings. And this was, I thought, I've heard about this kind of a God before. But for the first time in my life, I began to question the person that wrote that. Surely they knew that God. Surely they'd had some practical experience with that God, some connect. And so I continued to go to the church, and I began to really feel at home. It made such sense to me, the things I was learning from the Bible and from Science and Health, which is a book written by Mrs. Eddy, who was a woman who founded a religion in America. One of her biographers, Julian Gill, who's not a Christian Scientist, wrote that in her 60s she was indefatigable. In her 70s, she was famous. In her lifetime, 1860 to 1910, she was one of the most famous women in America. In her 70s, she was famous, and in her 80s, she was indomitable. And I love the model. I love the book Science and Health, which is just a key to the Bible for us. At any rate, having started this journey in this Christian Science church, I had my daughter, our first daughter. My husband came home from Vietnam, and my daughter got really ill. And for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to call a doctor, I was going to call a Christian Science Practitioner, which is someone who prays to find spiritual solutions to anything, whether it's health, finances, relationships, whatever the challenge might be. And he came over to my house immediately, and he started talking to me about this God that I had recognized in Psalms 103 that I was amazed with, but I believed in, and told me about this God who was all good, but more than that, all powerful. And I believed it. I believed it down to my toes, and that he could never know evil, but he certainly could help you confront it with his allness and his onlyness. He left. I went in, picked up my daughter out of her crib when she woke up from her nap, and she was totally well. And I joined the church 2 weeks later. And ever since then, I have loved learning more about this God. My Christian Science teacher, and in Christian Science you can take a class for 2 weeks to learn more about Christian Science and more deepen and enrich your study of God. He liked to tell the story of a young boy who kept a strawberry patch. And he pulled the weeds out of the strawberry patch, and someone came up and said, "Wow, you sure know your weeds." And he said, "Nope, I just know my strawberries." And I think that's one of the things that I'm learning most about Christian Science is that it's all in thought. What you think determines your experience. So you want to choose those thoughts that are true, at least in my belief in Christian Science, that are aligned with what God is knowing. In the FBI, if you are working with counterfeit money, you don't study a lot of different counterfeits. You study what a real dollar looks like, so you can recognize the counterfeit. And so a study of Christian Science, a life devoted to Christian Science, is one that is devoted to studying a God that is good and omnipotent. Mrs. Eddy asked the question in Science and Health, either God is omnipotent or there is no omnipotence. And then she says, what cannot God do? And I've certainly had that proven in my life. I wouldn't be a Christian Scientist if it weren't practical, if it didn't really work. When we were raising our children, we were open to calling a doctor. As a matter of fact, we gave ourselves 3 days. And we decided after 3 days, if there wasn't a change, if there wasn't either a healing or a real change, progress, then we'd call a doctor. But in raising 3 daughters, we never once, ever had the need, because we met with broken ankles, broken hand, serious cases of poison ivy, children's diseases, relationships, challenges with grades, challenges with dates, raising 3 daughters. There were all kinds of issues that we met and loved. So at any rate, my study has led me into the practice of Christian Science. I work today now with people really around the world. I have people who call with all kinds of concerns, and it's a joy to meet them at a place I love, which gives God the glory, honor, and power due his name. That's my story.